Alright guys, so for today's lesson I'm going to show you how to analyze a short poem. So we're going to focus on Fireflies in the Garden by Robert Frost, and I'm basically just going to show you how I do the process so you can see my technique and hopefully it's helpful for you. So first what I do is I read the poem aloud to myself, and that helps me get the vibe of the poem, helps me to identify anything that I notice that jumps out to me, any words that confuse me, and then from there I do the analysis. So let's start with that. Fireflies in the garden. Here come real stars to fill the upper skies, and here on earth come emulating flies, that though they never equal stars in size, and they were never really stars at heart, achieve at times a very star-like start. Only, of course, they can't sustain the part. So now I've read it, and I've gotten a little bit of an idea for the vibe and perhaps the message of the poem. And let's say that I didn't understand the word emulating, so I'm going to go ahead and highlight that in pink, because I use pink highlighter to denote things that I'm going to define. So then let's pull up the definition on Merriam-Webster. So here we go, and it basically means to strive to equal or excel, or to imitate, or to equal or approach equality with. Now I like these two first definitions the most, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a little line here that takes points to the definition that I'm going to write, and I'm going to write that in. So imitate, and then a little semicolon that denotes that I'm going to do another definition below it, and to strive to equal or excel. Alright, so now I've got my little definition here for that. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just kind of go line by line and try and pull some meaning out of each of the lines. And I have a yellow highlighter here because I use that for ideas that jump out to me, words and comparisons and metaphors that I find to be relevant to the poem. So I'm going to go through line by line and highlight some stuff that I like. So for the first line, here come real stars to fill the upper skies. So what's this talking about? Well, I think it's talking about how the narrator is looking up at the sky and he's seeing some stars. They're coming out. It's nighttime and the stars are starting to glow. So I'm gonna highlight real stars because he's comparing those to the flies that are coming out later. So in order to highlight this comparison, I'm going to highlight the stars that he's noticing. So then second line, and here on earth come emulating flies. Now these are the fireflies that he's talking about in the title. So I'm going to highlight the flies, and that's so that we know that these are the two subjects that are being compared by the poem. I'm also going to highlight on earth because this is relevant here. Earth is the mortal plane. It's the mundane place where we have things like fireflies and not things like stars that are celestial and kind of awe-inspiring and super big. That though they never equal stars in size, well, I'm going to highlight never equal stars in size because this is saying that they, despite wanting to emulate the real stars, they can't. They can't all the way because they're not as big as stars. So that's important. And they were never really stars at heart. I'm going to highlight never really stars at heart because by their nature, they're not stars. They're flies, they're fireflies, they're little bugs. So in emulating the stars and trying to be stars, they're denying their nature. They're kind of going outside what they really are and what they're meant to be. Next line. But they achieve at times a very star-like start. So this is saying, in my opinion, that they their attempt at emulating these stars is sort of working a little bit at the start. They have some of the elements of stars down. They can glow because they're fireflies. So they're a little bit star-like. And then next line, only of course, they can't sustain the part. So I'm gonna highlight can't sustain the part because even though they start out a little bit like stars, even though they can glow, they can't do it forever and they can't do it all the way. Now let's think about the part. Well, in emulating the stars, in imitating them, they're actors. And part, that can be like a role, an act, a performance. And when they can't sustain it, that's referring to how they can't keep it up. And it's not authentic. Alright, so then what I do after I've highlighted everything is I add some annotations for each of the highlights that I've made. So here for real stars, I'm gonna write some stuff that real stars can do, some characteristics of real stars, because we've determined that we're comparing flies to stars here. So let's see, stars can glow. They're big, right? So they're large. They're pretty impressive. What else? They're far away. And these flies, do you think they envy them? I think so. Envied. Alright. So then, next highlight, on Earth. Now, we talked about how this is sort of the mundane, the kind of mortal plane, where things aren't like stars. They're not super impressive, and they're not super huge, and they're not really as envied as something that are so impressive to us. So then I highlighted flies. So let's talk about the flies. Well, draw a line coming up here. And fireflies. I don't know what fireflies do. Well, they can glow, but they're kind of small. And I'm thinking of the fireflies in relation to all the things that I wrote down for stars, right? Because the poem is comparing the two. So they can glow, but they're small. They're not very impressive. They're kind of mundane. There's a lot of them on Earth, and we see them a lot. They're not far away. They're here. They're kind of everywhere. And they're the ones that envy. So they envy the stars. Alright, so I've written down my annotation for that. So now let's look at this one. They never equal stars in size. Well, they can't. They're small. They can't do one element of what the stars can do. And they were never really stars at heart. Now, I'm going to group these together because they both kind of talk about the same thing. An element of failure to fully emulate stars. But I've also highlighted star-like start. So they can somewhat succeed. But they can't sustain the part. They can't do it forever, and they can't do it completely. Right? Alright, so now I'm going to go through and I'm going to read the poem again, and this is just going to check for anything that I've missed, any vibes that I think might increase any of the importance of what I've written, or maybe might require some more annotation or highlighting of details that I've missed. And then I'm going to sort of state my conclusions about what this poem means to me, what I've determined through my analysis of it. Fireflies in the garden. Here come real stars to fill the upper skies, and here on earth come emulating flies, that though they never equal stars in size, and they were never really stars at heart, achieve at times a very star-like start. Only, of course, they can't sustain the part. Alright, so I think this poem means that, we're looking at flies versus stars. There's a comparison here. And it's talking about how the flies, even though they can't fully emulate the stars, they are a little bit star-like, and that's encouraging, right? Even little fireflies, as mundane and common as they are, they can be a little bit star-like. They can be a little bit as impressive as celestial bodies that are far away and huge and really bright. But, of course, they can't do it completely. They can't sustain the part. They're by their nature, they're fireflies. Alright, so now we've done that, I'm going to talk a little bit about some errors that are possible to make here. One thing you have to keep in mind that I think is really important is you don't want to highlight too much. At least for me, highlighting too much can obscure the meaning of the poem. It can make it hard to really pull out some of the more meaningful and symbolic parts of the text. So if I were to highlight, for example, here come real stars, well, what does that add? I don't really think that adds anything, right? I want to just highlight what's relevant. The subject that's being compared to the flies, right? And just because, here they come, that doesn't really add anything to my analysis. So that's one thing to avoid. Another thing is you don't want to just highlight two things or some things that might not fully represent or capture the poem. Because if I were to just highlight, for instance, the stars and can't sustain the part, well, I'm missing out on all of this juicy stuff that I've annotated here. So what I like to do is anytime I come to a part of a line that I think I can add something to or annotate, I highlight that. And that really helps. Alright, so I think that's basically all I have to talk about this. Hopefully that example helps. And yeah, that's just basically how I do it. So thank you for listening.